That's a great idea. I can generate the story in segments. I will aim for a total story length of about 3,000 words, delivered in 5 approximately 600-word parts. Here is part 1 of the story, adhering to the constraints of no intro, no anchor, and no headings. The air tasted like rust and ozone, a familiar metallic tang that meant the generators were running at full tilt, shaking the metal floor beneath his worn boots. Kaelen tightened the wrench on the coolant line, the pipe hot even through his thick work gloves. The lights in Sector 7 were always a sickly yellow, casting long, oily shadows that seemed to stretch and shift with the drone of the machinery. 3,000 meters beneath the surface, under the weight of the dead city above, this humming subterranean complex was all that was left of human endeavor. He didn't know the year, only the sequence, Cycle 49, Day 218. Time was measured in maintenance schedules and power fluctuations, not seasons or holidays. The coolant line sealed, he wiped his brow with the back of a hand, leaving a smear of grease across his forehead. His shift was nearly done. All that remained was the standard sensor check in the auxiliary vent shaft, a tedious task that usually revealed nothing but dust and the occasional scuttling wire rat. As he walked the narrow catwalk, the sound of his own heavy breathing was almost lost in the industrial symphony of the deep levels. The other mechanics were already gone, ascending to the slightly less noxious living quarters, leaving him alone with the machinery. Loneliness wasn't a feeling Kaelen recognized much anymore. It was simply the state of things. He reached the vent hatch, its will stiff with disuse. With a grunt, he cranked it open. A blast of unexpectedly cold air hit him, clean and sharp, carrying a faint, earthy scent that was alien to the complex. He froze. All internal air was scrubbed, recycled, and warmed. This was wrong. This was a breach. He activated his shoulder lamp and shone it down the dark, narrow shaft. The metal walls were clean, too clean, lacking the usual grime and condensation. He checked his wrist console, running diagnostics on the structural integrity monitors. All systems green. No alarms. The console was lying. A system this old, running on patchwork code, was notorious for blind spots. Kaelen descended the maintenance ladder, his movements careful and practiced. The cold air intensified, and the earthy smell became distinct. Petrichor, like rain on dry soil. Impossible. As his boots touched the bottom of the shaft, the beam of his lamp caught something that made his breath catch. The metal vent wall had been peeled back, not cut, but pushed like tinfoil. Beyond the warped metal, there was not the expected layer of bedrock or thermal shielding, but a gaping hole, and beyond the hole, a vast, black space. He stepped through the opening. The sheer scale of the cavern was staggering. His lamp was useless, swallowed by the darkness. He felt a profound sense of outside, a crushing pressure that had nothing to do with depth. He took a hesitant step onto the floor of the cavern. It was not rock or gravel, but something strangely springy. He aimed his lamp at his feet and saw a dull, silver-gray surface woven with an intricate, almost crystalline pattern. As his light touched the pattern, the material beneath his feet began to glow, faintly at first, then spreading out in complex, interlocking geometric lines. The light illuminated the space. He wasn't in a cavern. He was in a chamber of impossible size, the ceiling lost somewhere in the black void above. The walls were not rock, but this same intricate, glowing silver material. And in the center of the chamber, suspended above the floor by nothing visible, was a perfectly smooth, obsidian sphere, easily 50 meters in diameter. It radiated a silence that was louder than the loudest machine. Kaelen felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't a blind spot in the system. This wasn't a natural formation. This was something built, something vast, something impossibly old and utterly unknown. He had not found a coolant leak. He had found a secret. And the air was still cold, and it still smelled like rain. His calm crackled to life, static-laced and thin, the automated voice of the complex controller. Sector 7, Kaelen. Report status. Shift end approaching. Kaelen didn't answer. He couldn't take his eyes off the giant black sphere. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the history books they had given him were all wrong. You are asking for the continuation of the 3,000-word story. Here is part 2, approximately 1,500 words, of the narrative. The silence was the first thing that returned. Not the vacuum of space, which had its own quiet hum, but a complete, deafening absence of sound. Alara opened her eyes. She wasn't vaporized. She wasn't anywhere. She was floating in a soup of non-existence. The temporal forge was gone. The console was gone. Her body felt different. She brought a hand up to her face. It was solid, but the light that hit it didn't reflect. It refracted into a million tiny spectral needles. Her hand was real, yet unreal, existing as a waveform more than as mass. She had become a ghost in the machine of the universe. The singularity hadn't destroyed her, it had splintered her. The temporal anchor, keyed to her chronometer, had done its job. It had stabilized the collapse, preventing the anomaly from spreading. But in stabilizing the field, it had used her as the stabilizing agent, scattering her consciousness and physical form across the resulting temporal wake. She was no longer constrained by space or time. A flicker of thought, and she saw the remnants of the Ethel Red, a swirling cloud of energized dust, rapidly dissipating. Another thought, and she saw Rorik's shuttle, not destroyed, but frozen, encased in a timeless amber at the exact moment he activated the dummy chronometer. He was safe, in a sense, preserved in a moment that would never end. Alara pushed her new form, a purely energetic manifestation of will, towards the star charts, the actual, spatial location where the anomaly had been. The empty space was clear now, the light of distant galaxies steady and undisturbed. The sector was saved. Her lie had worked. The crew she'd forced into the escape pods had likely made their desperate jump and were now safe in Sol System, reporting a heroic sacrifice by their commander and analyst. But the silence was beginning to feel less like peace and more like a prison. To exist without the friction of reality. No air, no pain, no hunger, no sense of time passing, was to be utterly alone. She was an observer, a consciousness adrift in the cosmic archives. A sudden, sharp pulse of energy interrupted the profound stillness. It wasn't a natural occurrence. It was a beacon. Alara focused her scattered awareness on the source. It was millions of light-years away, well outside the jurisdiction of the Orion Arm, beyond the explored limits of the known galaxy. The pulse was coherent, structured, and most importantly, it was calling to her. She realized the temporal forge hadn't just collapsed the anomaly. The massive energy burst of the feedback loop had ripped a second, stable, temporary conduit through the fabric of space-time. And that beacon was on the other side. It was a choice between eternal, meaningless observation and a potentially suicidal journey. With a determination that burned hotter than the forge itself, Alara focused her will. She didn't travel in the conventional sense.
She reformed.
She dissolved her dispersed waveform and concentrated it, a furious knot of energy, aiming for the origin point of the beacon. The journey was a blur of fractured colors and mathematical noise. She passed through dimensions she didn't know existed, experienced the birth and death of stars in microseconds, and felt the chilling, alien indifference of true cosmic vastness. Then, she slammed back into existence. She was standing, solid mass returning with a shocking, painful jolt. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of flowering alien flora and ozone. She was on a platform made of smooth, obsidian-like rock, surrounded by colossal, bioluminescent trees whose canopies formed a glowing, cathedral-like ceiling. Before her stood the source of the beacon. It was a structure built not of metal or stone, but of woven light. It hummed with the same coherent energy that had called her. Standing at the base of the structure was an entity, not humanoid, but impossible to define. It was tall, slender, and seemed to be made entirely of crystallized twilight. Its form shifted constantly, its edges never quite fixed. The entity didn't have a mouth, yet a voice resonated directly inside Alara's mind, clear, genderless, and impossibly ancient. The chronometer soul. It is good you answer the call, little echo. Alara staggered, her returned body protesting the sudden gravity. Where am I? What are you? You are at the nexus. And I am the weaver. I mend the fabric that mortals tear. Asterisk, you were not meant to survive the collapse. You are a paradox. The temporal anchor should have been consumed, rendering the sequence safe, not scattered and reassembled. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I built in a failsafe, Alara stated, pushing down the raw panic that threatened to overwhelm her. The biological chronometer. It was designed to withstand the feedback. Foolish optimism, or necessary genius. It matters little now. Your action saved your sector, but it has created a flaw in the wider tapestry. That flaw is you. The weaver gestured with a crystalline appendage toward the woven light structure. The structure solidified, and Alara saw that it wasn't a temple or a ship. It was a gigantic, complex loom. And on that loom was woven the reality of their entire local cluster, stars, planets, and the thin, shimmering lines of space-time that connected them. The anomaly was a stray thread. You cut it, but your scissors left a tear. And that tear threatens to unravel everything your single act saved. What do I have to do? Alara asked. The question was instinctual. Her entire life had been about problem-solving, even when the solution required her death. Now that death had been postponed, the duty remained. You are the flaw. Therefore, you must become the needle. Your unique state, part human, part chronometer, now existing between the layers of time, makes you capable of moving through the lattice. Asterisk, asterisk. The weaver explained, projecting images directly into Alara's mind. Visions of other, smaller temporal tiers appearing across the saved sector, microanomalies, side effects of the massive forge blast. These weren't world-ending events, but they were destabilizing, causing minor disruptions. Planets shifting slightly in orbit, communications failing, history subtly editing itself. The collateral damage of your solution must be addressed. You must enter these fractures and, using your chronometer core, stabilize them. You'll seal the tiers from the inside. Asterisk, asterisk. And if I don't, then the microanomalies multiply. They connect. They will pull your sector into a slow, agonizing chronological entropy. Your people will not be destroyed in fire, but will simply cease to have ever been. Asterisk, asterisk. Alara understood. She hadn't bought them 6 months of life. She had bought them a slow, chronological death, unless she fixed it. What is the risk to me? Every correction will further drain the stability of your anchor. You are running on borrowed time. The core cannot sustain indefinite temporal travel. Eventually, the flaw will be consumed, and you will be dispersed utterly, irretrievably. You will be erased from the loom. Asterisk, asterisk. The weaver offered no comfort, only the terrible terms of her new existence. How do I find the tears? The crystalline entity shifted, and a faint, pulsating light emerged from its chest, the beacon that had called her. It floated over to Alara and dissolved into her chest, merging with the cold, precise hum of the artificial chronometer in her heart. The chronometer soul is now linked to the weaver's sight. You will sense the tears as dissonances in the temporal field.
Go.
The first fracture is already growing unstable. Asterisk, asterisk. Before Alara could utter another word, the world around her twisted. The obsidian rock, the glowing trees, the crystalline weaver, all dissolved into a swirling vortex of green and gold light. She felt the painful wrench of reformation, her body dissolving back into a stream of pure energy, then being violently reconstituted somewhere else. She opened her eyes, gasping. She was no longer on an alien world, but in a dusty, dimly lit museum storage facility. She was surrounded by crates marked with Earth historical dates, 1945, 1776, medieval artifacts. The air here felt thick, wrong. The light was dull, and the shadows seemed to writhe. She looked down at her hands. The spectral shimmer was gone. She was fully solid, but she could feel the temporal dissonance vibrating through her bones. The first microanomaly was here. She followed the growing vibration, the weaver's sight guiding her chronometer core, to a large, heavy crate in the corner. It was unmarked. As she approached, the wood of the crate began to steam, and the air around it grew unnaturally cold. She cautiously lifted the lid. Inside, resting on velvet, was a single, innocuous object, a pristine and used ink pen, silver and gold, clearly expensive. It looked like a museum piece, but as she focused on it, Alara felt the object fighting the timeline. This pen, she realized, was leaking time. She concentrated the power of her anchor. The silver pen began to glow with a sickly green light. The world around them, the storage facility, the crates, began to flicker, shifting like a poorly rendered hologram. For a second, the crate next to her was dated 2050, then 1890, then settled back to 1945. The pen was rewriting the history of this room, subtly contaminating the artifacts around it, threatening to undo a century of recorded history. Alara knew the procedure. She had to use her own stable core to override the object's chaotic timeline, forcing it to accept its proper place. It was a brutal, non-scientific act of pure will. She reached out and grasped the pen. The silver metal was searingly cold, and a wave of nausea hit her as 1,000 fractured moments flooded her mind. The moment the pen was made, the moment it was lost, the moment it was found. She felt the timeline resisting her, pulling her consciousness thin. Stabilize. Assert the anchor, the weaver's voice screamed in her mind, a distant, fading echo. Alara fought the temporal current, focusing only on the cold, hard reality of the pen's physical form in her hand. This pen was made on this date. It belongs in this crate. She pushed, pouring her essence, the finite, measured stability of her chronometer core, into the object. A blinding flash erupted from the pen. The temporal dissonance shrieked and snapped back. The object instantly turned to dust, its chaotic timeline erased. Alara collapsed against the crate, gasping. The flickering in the room stopped. The ambient light stabilized. The profound, exhausting feeling of loss washed over her, a loss of self, a tiny measure of her borrowed life spent. She pushed herself to her feet, tasting blood in her mouth. She was solid, intact but weaker. The cost of being the needle was clear. But the fear was replaced by a grim satisfaction. She had fixed it. The weaver's guidance, the pulsating light in her chest, immediately flared, urging her forward. The next fracture was already calling. Hurry, little echo. The price of your solution is eternal vigilance. Your second task awaits. Asterisk, asterisk. Alara looked out a small, grimy window of the storage facility. Outside, the city was dark, ancient, and entirely unfamiliar. She was alone, in a place she did not know, with a mission that would inevitably cost her everything. She opened the door and stepped out, the dust motes of the timeless museum settling behind her, ready to find the next tear in the fabric of the universe.